This week's episode of Dark Side of the Ring was the season finale titled The World According to Marty Jannetty. The world according to Marty Jannetty is a scary place. We've all heard the wild stories. A lot of them were recounted here. Some were not, and I'll share some of that with you. But the thing that comes across when you watch this episode is that Marty Jannetty is one of the biggest examples of wasted potential ever in the wrestling business. Because he was a very good worker, but he was also his own worst enemy outside the ring. Even when he was given opportunity after opportunity, he squandered each and every one of them. I don't think he ever would have achieved the same level of success that Shawn Michaels did, because Shawn, he was just on another level from everybody else, especially in the late 90s. And Shawn had a certain charisma that Jannetty did not have, but in the ring, Jannetty was first class. The problem with Marty Jannetty is that he is a 63-year-old man who still lives like he's a 23-year-old. And that is just not sustainable. He blames others, including God, for his problems. If he wants to know who the one responsible is for all of his problems, all he has to do is look in the mirror. So it was sad. It's sad to see him in the state that he's in now, but a lot of it really is a mess of his own making. And I think the words cautionary tale come to mind when I think of Marty Jannetty. One of the things that's really taken a toll on him has been his ankle. All those years of all that high-flying style and a badly sprained ankle that he suffered at the Survivor Series in 1996 that never healed properly have combined to result in him being wheelchair-bound until his ankle can heal after the surgery that he's had done on it. And he welcomed the crew into his home, and his ankle looks horrible. You know, with all the swelling, it looks painful just staring at it. His doctor says that on a scale of 1 to 10, if he had to rank the pain that he thinks Marty is in, he would say it's a 12. And that's on a good day. Marty says that he had a joint replacement on the right ankle, reconstructive surgery on the left one. His shoulders are also torn up. He's got lots of injuries, but his ankle is by far the worst. Al Snow was interviewed. He tagged with Marty as part of the New Rockers in 1996. Al looks great. He looks better now than he did when he was still wrestling full-time. They also interviewed Brutus the Barber Beefcake, who had to be there since you knew they were going to cover the Barbershop. But he had his wife Missy with him as well, and she definitely did not need to be on there. Pat Tanaka, who has been friends with Marty for years and years and worked against him, first in the AWA as part of Bad Company against the Midnight Rockers, and then in WWE as a member of the Orient Express. Tanaka's another piece of work. Tanaka once claimed that he made $1 million a day for WrestleMania. Yeah, and I make a gajillion doing this podcast. See how easy it is to tell stories? MVP has talked about Tanaka trying to rip him off for crack money when he was a young wrestler on the indies, just trying to make it. And there's been other stories about him finessing money out of other wrestlers as well. They also interviewed Mean Mike Moran, a former wrestler. He was one half of the Disorderly Conduct tag team in WCW. He's been friends with Marty for a long time, since 1984, when they worked their first territory together. And Karen Walker, who they identified as a friend of Marty's for 40 years. Now, Marty on Facebook, before the episode aired, was already doing damage control and calling her a delusional ex. So, of course, I read that and I said, I got to see this episode. She was in middle school and she had a crush on Kerry Von Erich. And so she went to one of the shows to watch Kerry, and that's where she saw Marty for the first time. And she was so smitten with him, as he was with her, and she said the two of them hooked up the first night that they met. So Marty had sex with her when she was in middle school. Lovely. He said that he would see her every time he went to St. Louis, that she was his St. Louis girlfriend. And she says, you can't believe 99% of what Marty says because he just comes up with the strangest stories, and if he's telling you a story, it's very likely it's not true. We heard something similar from Bam Bam Bigelow's friends in his episode, right? There's something about these old school wrestlers, like they're in work mode all the time and they just can't help themselves. Either that or they're just con men. And there's plenty of con men in the wrestling business, even today. But I wonder what it is that just attracts so many of them. Maybe it's I don't know. Maybe it's the lack of regulation and oversight. I don't know. I'm sure that's part of it. Case in point, Marty tells a story of being in a chemistry class in school and mixing together two chemicals after the teacher specifically told them not to mix those two chemicals together. He did it anyway, right? Because that's what kids do. You tell a kid not to do something, the kid's going to do it, right? That's only natural. And he did it anyway, and this might be my favorite reenactment that they have ever done on this show because it is just so over-the-top ridiculous. They show the explosion in the chemistry class, and you see his classmate get blown backwards out of her chair, and she's soaring through the air. Like it knocked her back 50 feet, and she just disappears in this plume of smoke. Now, did that actually happen? Probably not, but it makes for a good story. He also said that hookers would give him freebies when he was 13 years old because they thought he was cute. I would like to know where he was hanging out when he was 13 that he was around all of these hookers. I mean, man, I thought I was having fun when I was 13, but I wasn't having Marty Jannetty fun. He says he once attended a sex addiction clinic and ended up dating his counselor. He says that he was beaten by his mother as a child. His dad was a sweetheart, but he hid the beatings from him so that his parents wouldn't fight. Marty used to work in Mid-South as Marty Oates, working as a tag team with Jerry Oates. Back then, Marty was sowing his royal oats, probably listening to some Hall & Oates, because they were the shit back then. Still are. Then he jumped to Central States in Kansas City, which is where he got paired up with a shy, quiet, he says, nerdy kid named Shawn Michaels. They got paired up as a tag team. It was instant chemistry between the two of them. After a while, they landed in the AWA as the Midnight Rockers, and they were clearly modeling themselves after the Rock and Roll Express. I mean, when they went to WWE, that's basically what they were, Vince McMahon's answer to Ricky and Robert. And the girls went wild for them. One of those girls, I should point out, was a young Tammy Sytch. Now we know that Tammy got a piece of Marty's tag team partner years later. We all know about that. But did you know that before Tammy had a thing for Shawn Michaels, she was all about Marty Jannetty? It's true. It's true. In 1986, to be exact. Tammy wrote into one of the old wrestling magazines. And there it was, Tammy Sytch from Old Bridge, New Jersey. And I've got the picture to prove it. This is what the letter said. It said, I have been a WWF fan for about 4 years. One Saturday morning, I decided to watch the AWA on TV. I had never been interested in the AWA until I saw Marty Jannetty. I think he is the most gorgeous guy in the world. The problem is I cannot find any centerfolds, articles, or color posters of him in any wrestling magazine. Please tell me if he is married. I hope he isn't because I want him. Imagine those two as a couple. What a train wreck that would be. So I thought that was worth mentioning. You know, with her opening this season of Dark Side of the Ring and Marty closing the season out, it's pretty amazing that this woman is writing in, and she must have been, oh God, how she had to be in her teens, like early teens at that point in '86. And these two, they end up bookending this latest season of Dark Side of the Ring. But in the AWA, they had great matches with Playboy Buddy Rose and Doug Summers that I had not seen any of those matches until WWE came out with their Shawn Michaels from the Vault DVD in 2003. So that was 20 years ago. That was my first time seeing any of their matches together from back then. Those two teams, and they were really good. And as Bruce Pritchard tells the story, those AWA matches got the attention of Pat Patterson, who pushed for Vince McMahon to bring them in. Vince was apprehensive about doing so because of their reputation outside the ring. But he brings them in anyway. And Marty sort of glossed over all this in the episode, but what happened is the Rockers debut in June of '87. Out of the blue, Vince McMahon holds a talent meeting and he warns them to make sure they stay clean. So this is probably around the time they started first testing for cocaine, because I know '87 is when they instituted their first drug policy. And cocaine was so rampant, it was becoming an issue. People were missing shows and all kinds of stuff was going on. So they start instituting this drug testing. And that's their first night in the locker room that they have this meeting. Terry Garvin tells them on that first night to go around and introduce themselves and shake everybody's hand. And instead, they chose to remain low-key and they kept to themselves because they knew they had a reputation for being troublemakers. And they probably figured, okay, if we stay away from everybody, then we can stay out of trouble. So instead, this is the wrestling business though. So you get heat for doing something and you could also get heat for not doing anything at all. Pretty much you could just get heat for no reason. So what happens is they came off as oh, they must be better than us, right? Because they're not going around and they're not introducing themselves and they're not shaking their hands. So now they have a rep for thinking that they're better than everybody else in the locker room. They did introduce themselves to Davey Boy Smith and Jim Powers. This was at the bar after the show. And everything was cool until Jimmy Jack Funk, who was heavily intoxicated, let's just say. He comes over, he starts chewing glass. He's egging the two of them on. Marty had apparently hooked up with a girl that Jimmy was interested in. So that's what ruffled his feathers, and that's why he started giving them shit. Sean ends up breaking a glass bottle over his own head, as if to tell him, there, you happy now? And so they leave the bar. That's one version of what happened. There's another version that wasn't quite as tame as that one that had Sean and Marty tearing up the bar, and I'm sure that caused quite a disturbance. Now keep in mind, this was only a month after Hacksaw Jim Duggan and the Iron Sheik that got pulled over and busted for drug possession in New Jersey, which was a huge black eye for the company. So the last thing they needed was more bad publicity. So they end up being flown to the offices in Stamford. They're going to meet with Vince. And Sean had snakeskin boots on. Vince walks in, he says, nice boots. They're made for walking, you know. And then he goes, just kidding. And then he took them into his office and he proceeded to fire them. And that was the end of the Rockers, their first run in WWE after a whopping 2 weeks. A year later, though, they got hired back. But this is the point in the episode where Marty teaches us about GAT. Do you know what GAT is? I know what gout is. I didn't know what GAT was. I know what a GAT is. Right? Not the thing I wanted to pull out and blow my brains out with last week after the 15th bro from Russo. GAT stands for God's Amusement Toy, which is what Marty refers to himself as, and he's standing at the altar in some church. I don't know where they filmed this. But for this scene, he's at the altar in a small church somewhere as he's explaining this to us. And you see, when God gets bored, he turns his scorn to Marty Jannetty. And I guess he throws some lightning bolts at him. So basically, nothing is ever his fault. It is simply God being bored, and he decides to torture poor Marty Jannetty, I guess just to get his rocks off. Al Snow says he knows all about GAT. Clearly, he's heard this before. And he says it's Marty not taking responsibility for his actions. Marty is Marty's worst enemy. Marty said that he and Sean did everything together. They trained together. They rode together. They ate together. They partied together. They did women together. And they were a tag team, so it kind of makes sense. Then they addressed the Chuck Austin incident from 1990. It was a Superstars taping. For those who don't know, Chuck Austin was an enhancement talent they brought in. It was a Superstars taping. It was the Rockers against Lanny Poffo and a rookie named Chuck Austin. Austin had only been training for 6 months by this point. He went to the show with a couple of buddies. They drove there. And he got inside and he offered his services as a jobber, as a job guy. And he only had 6 months of experience in the ring. He claims that he told this to whatever agents or whoever he spoke to behind the scenes, and they let him work the show anyway for $150. That's what he made. And it proved to be catastrophic because in taking Marty's finish, the rocker dropper, where he places his leg over the person's neck and then he sort of drops down, this guy had no idea what he was doing. And if you watch it, he actually kind of jumps up into the air a little bit after Marty's already in mid-move. So instead of just dropping down, he goes up first and then he ends up coming down straight on top of his own head and neck. That's not a move you're supposed to be taking standing up straight either. He was standing up straight. He was basically vertical when he took the move. So he just took it wrong and he was instantly paralyzed. And he laid there motionless. I mean, he was sort of moving his upper body around a little bit, but he was basically motionless for over 20 minutes until paramedics got to him because he claimed WWE had no doctors. They had no trainers on staff there that night. They had to airlift him to a nearby hospital. He damaged his 4th, 5th, and 6th vertebrae. He did eventually regain some mobility. He was able to move around with crutches. But he sued the company and he sued the Rockers. Sued them for $3 million. Jannetty in the episode says he sued for $10 million. And anyway, the jury ruled in his favor, but instead of awarding him the $3 million that he sued for, they awarded him almost $27 million. Now, Shawn Michaels was dismissed from the lawsuit, which makes sense because he played no direct part in the actual injury. But they left Jannetty on there as a defendant with WWE. And the company said that he was warned ahead of time about the risks involved and he was negligent by botching the move, which he clearly did. Bruno Sammartino, he was so outraged when he saw the video of what happened, he agreed to testify as an expert witness on Austin's behalf. By this point, Bruno was already on the outs with Vince McMahon. So the company was found to be 90% negligent, Jannetty was 5% negligent, and Austin himself was deemed to be 5% negligent. WWE actually brought wrestling mats into the courtroom and they had Jannetty perform the rocker dropper move on someone just to demonstrate for the jury the proper way that the move should be taken. That person they brought in to take the rocker dropper in court, Dean Malenko, who had been working for the company as a referee while they were on a swing through Tampa. So they brought him in for the case. Evidently, it had no impact on the jury, given how they ruled. So Jannetty was on the hook for a lot of money, which in the episode he says WWE just took out of his royalty checks for a while. As far as Chuck Austin today, he's still alive. He lives with a motorized wheelchair now. He's in very rough shape. He's got debilitating spasms and pain on a daily basis all over his body. There was a news story a few years ago about him being dependent on painkillers. So it's not a very happy existence for him. He spends most of his days bedridden, just in agony, and it's just hell on earth for this guy. And again, I feel sorry for him. I mean, it's a terrible thing that happened, but you watch the video, and certainly there's some responsibility on his part just for the way he took the move. It just clearly looked like somebody who didn't know what he was doing. But you also look at it and go, how the fuck does WWE allow somebody to just walk in off the street like that with 6 months of experience and you put them in the ring at a television taping against the Rockers? I mean, how does something like that happen? Obviously, after this incident, they changed their practices and how they vetted some of these people so that something like this wouldn't happen again. Al Snow said that Marty had issues with all kinds of drugs. Crack, cocaine, somas, halcyons. There was a story of the hotel fight, which is a famous story between Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty, where Shawn put Marty through a window. That's the version they told here on the episode, but in other versions of the story, the window part is not mentioned. Only that they tore up a hotel room, and Roddy Piper is the one who really instigated the whole thing. In the episode, Marty's friend says that Marty came into the room drunk. He was cussing out Shawn. Shawn puts Marty through the window. Thankfully, they were on the ground floor level, or else that could have been catastrophic. If this is true, by the way, that also means that Shawn Michaels put him through a window not once but twice in his life, which is pretty funny. It makes me wonder if the genesis of the whole barbershop window idea was kind of like an inside joke playing off the fight. So according to this version of it, Marty then climbs back in through the window and he asks Shawn if he thinks he could do that again. And they are brawling around. Marty ends up on top of him and he is messing him up real bad. He's got blood all over him, Shawn's blood. He's trying to choke him out. He claims that Shawn is the one who was left all bloodied. And in Shawn's book, Heartbreak and Triumph, he tells it like this. Roddy Piper was there. That seems to be one of the things commonly agreed upon, that Piper was present for all this. Shawn claims that Piper was drunk and was making comments about Shawn being the future of the business. And then Jannetty, who was also pretty wasted, he took offense to this. And he challenged Michaels to a fight, which Shawn says, I didn't want to have any part of this. Given his track record in shoot fights, I don't blame him. Jannetty then attacks him anyway. Marty, in the version that he is told in other shoot interviews, also blamed Piper for instigating the entire thing. He says that Roddy could have actually done more to break it up once they started going at it. He didn't seem to be in much of a rush to break things up. But one thing that Shawn and Marty agree on is that the cops got called, and when they arrested Marty, Randy Savage happened to arrive at the hotel at the same time. I guess maybe he was walking through the lobby, and they were taking Marty away in cuffs. And the cops recognized Savage and started marking out for him. Hey, you're the Macho Man. Randy is looking at this, and he's asking, what the hell's going on here? And when the cops tell him about the fight, Savage says, no, they weren't fighting for real. They were just working. They were working out what they're going to do in their next match. And he ended up giving the cops some autographs, after they asked for them, and they let Marty go. See, Macho Man saves the day. Marty is convinced that this was the incident that ultimately led to Vince McMahon breaking the Rockers up on TV. And that, of course, leads into the Barbershop incident. Taped in December of 1991, it did not actually air on television until a week before the Royal Rumble in 92, but it was taped in 91. There is no way they could have known at the time that this would become an all-timer segment that still gets talked about over 30 years later. The Rockers had been having problems on television for a while. It all culminated in this face-to-face with Brutus the Barber Beefcake hosting. Marty says, I'm ready to shake hands and rock and roll, and we'll put the past behind us. But if Shawn wants to leave, he can leave. They end up shaking hands. It looks like the Rockers are back on the same page. And then, boom! Michaels lays in a nice stiff super kick to the jaw. Marty says he kicked him so hard he didn't even feel the glass when he went through the window. And that was when Jannetty, the coward that he is, dove through the barbershop window in an effort to try to escape. He comes up all bloody. The Rockers are no more. This was the start of the Shawn Michaels singles push. And, I had to watch this. And I had to listen to Marty's friends, and I had to listen to Brutus Beefcake talk about how Shawn had Vince's ear, and all he did was kiss his ass, and that's why he got ahead. Even just watching as a fan, at the time, it was obvious that Shawn Michaels had bigger things in his future. Shawn Michaels, he always came across as the star of the team, and coming out of this segment, it was clear that he was the star. So whether Shawn was kissing ass or not to try to get to the top, he had the talent. He had the presence. And if I were Vince McMahon and I had the choice between the two of them and I could only pick one, I'd have gone with Shawn Michaels too. He backed the right horse. Just given Jannetty's track record alone, you couldn't trust him in that position. I'm not saying that, Shawn didn't get into trouble and he didn't party and all that too, but Marty obviously had a rep. And it goes back to the beginning of the review, with Al Snow and others talking about Marty being Marty's worst enemy. You can't blame Shawn Michaels for that. He may have been a dick. We know he was a dick, especially as the years went on. But he had the talent. He could be trusted more than Marty could. So Shawn got the chance and Marty didn't. Jannetty has nobody to blame for that but himself. And to listen to Brutus the Barber Beefcake of all people talk about someone kissing ass. If Eric Bischoff had brown on his nose last week talking about Hogan during the Bash at the Beach episode, then Beefcake's lips should have been that same shade of brown. So Marty was concerned about what the split meant for him. Shawn, he'd see that Shawn was going to get a push. Shawn was on the ascent. What about me? And Shawn at the time told him, don't worry about it. We're each going to be judged based on our work and what we can do from this point forward. And he told Marty, if you get over, they'll use you. Al Snow says he thinks Marty resented Shawn and that Shawn wanted to get away from Marty so he could do his own thing. And again, who could blame him? Marty was always getting into trouble. I mean, again, Shawn was no angel, but if he was constantly getting into trouble as often as they say he was, if I'm Shawn Michaels, I don't want that stink on me. I've got bigger aspirations here. I want to be the world champion. I want to make Hogan money. I don't want this guy bringing me down. Case in point, WrestleMania 8. It never made sense to me that after a hot angle like that, we end up with Shawn Michaels against El Matador. The logical WrestleMania match was Shawn Michaels against Marty Jannetty. And that was the plan. until Marty got in trouble with the law again. Surprise, surprise. This was a few days after the Rumble. He was arrested at 2 o'clock in the morning after an incident at the Yucatan Liquor Stand, which was a nightclub in Tampa. Apparently it was the hot spot at the time. The cops shot and killed a man there a month after this. But on this night, Jannetty was there with a young woman, 19 years old, trying to get in, and the girl tried to use a fake ID. When the cops tried to arrest her, Jannetty got involved. He grabbed the officer, which is not very wise. Don't do that. Marty has claimed it wasn't a fake ID issue, that they got inside just fine because they knew him there. So they get inside and they're partying. So basically they knew that she was underage. And if they knew that, then how did Marty not know that, right? I think we've established that Marty didn't give a shit. According to him, she started getting loud and obnoxious and they kicked her out and he went outside with her and there was an incident with the police officer where he claims they roughed her up and Jannetty claims he was only trying to protect her by pulling the officer off and it was all just a big misunderstanding. What the cops did not misunderstand were the baggies of cocaine that they found on both of them. And Jannetty was booked on possession of drug paraphernalia, resisting arrest with force. WWE, they didn't fire him, but they suspended him, after which they did bring him back. But it was a full year before we finally got the match between Shawn and Marty at the following year's Royal Rumble. And considering the talent between the two of them, they had a disappointing match. It wasn't a bad match. I thought it was good. It just wasn't as good as what they could have delivered. And they did deliver months later on Raw when Marty beat Shawn to win the Intercontinental title. This was in '93. Marty himself says that a few days before the pay-per-view, he and Shawn worked a match in Denver that he says was the best match of his career. It's like the best match nobody saw, aside from the people in Denver. So the expectations for their Rumble match were very high. Marty has told the story of going to the back after it was over, and Vince McMahon saying, "That's the greatest match ever? I'm very disappointed. I expected you two to steal the show." The next day, he was fired. And this comes down simply to who you believe more. Remember what Marty's friend Karen said at the beginning of this episode about him making up stories? According to Marty, what happened is Shawn went to Vince behind his back, and he told Vince the quality of the match was all Marty's fault. He thinks that Marty may have been messed up in the ring. Marty disputes this. He says the truth is Shawn got messed up on somas the night before and he passed out in a plate of his own food. And that he was the one, he being Marty, trying to lead Shawn around during the match when he got lost a few times. And instead, Shawn put it all on him. And Marty says it was Curt Hennig who saw Shawn all messed up and passed out in his food. And a few months later, when Vince rehired him, it was Curt Hennig who got him his job back. He says Curt told Vince the story about Shawn being passed out in his food, and it really pissed off Vince, which is why he hired Marty back and he put the Intercontinental title on him. He says that was done as a punishment to Shawn Michaels. Now, if he is to be believed, I don't know why it would have taken Curt Hennig 4 months to tell Vince and help get Marty his job back. It's like, if a friend of mine lost his job unjustly, I wouldn't wait 4 months to go to the boss and say, "Hey, you should probably know what happened here. This guy deserves to have his job back." So that's a little weird. Nor does it seem like much of a punishment to take the title off of Shawn Michaels, only to have Marty drop it right back to him 3 weeks later at a house show. That was the night that Diesel debuted as Shawn's bodyguard and helped him win the belt back. Doesn't seem like much of a punishment to me. What still stands out to me about their Rumble match, there is a spot where Shawn rams Marty shoulder first into the ring post. This is outside the ring. Gets him up on his shoulder, just runs him right into the post, right? He rams Marty's right shoulder into the post. Yet Marty comes up selling the left shoulder. Which I always thought, that type of stuff makes me wonder if Marty wasn't the one messed up. Okay? Or maybe they both were. It's entirely possible they were both fucked up that night. And that is the second year in a row that we lost out on a potential WrestleMania match between Shawn Michaels and Marty Jannetty, because I am pretty sure the plan for them was to work together again at Caesar's Palace for WrestleMania 9. And keep working the angle with Sensational Sherry, because Marty attacked Shawn in the back after their match at the Rumble, while Mean Gene was trying to interview Sherry, and Mean Gene is yelling at her because she was acting all hysterical. So the story clearly was not over between these two. It's not like Shawn pinned Marty and that was the end of it. I mean, they had a brawl in the back after the match. But when Marty got fired in 93, they changed direction from Shawn against Marty to Shawn against Tatanka, which is the match that we got at WrestleMania. But Marty was still having good matches in 93. I remember a really good one on Raw with Doink that year. It was 2 out of 3 falls. Doink, another Dark Side of the Ring subject this season. But then the following year, he got fired again for an incident at a hotel on a European tour. It's just amazing to me to think of how many opportunities this man got from Vince McMahon. Like, I can understand if you had somebody on the level of a Shawn Michaels in the mid-90s who caused a lot of shit. Vince McMahon let a lot of shit slide because he did not want Shawn to go work for WCW, and he recognized that this guy has talent. It's one thing if Vince McMahon gives a Hulk Hogan or a Bret Hart or a Shawn Michaels or an Undertaker, right? Opportunity after opportunity, even when they fuck up, right? I've never heard of Undertaker fucking up. I'm just using him as an example. But why would Vince McMahon keep bringing Marty Jannetty back? Like, he didn't need him. I mean, he had talent, but he saw something in Marty, and he just kept giving him chance after chance after chance, but he just couldn't get out of his own way. Marty and the Iron Sheik, I think, are neck and neck as far as the number of people hired and fired by Vince McMahon over the years. So they covered the New Rockers, with Marty and Al Snow as Leif Cassidy, which sucked. Marty went to WCW after that for a little bit. That didn't last long. He had several DUIs. One of them led to him losing his license for 10 years. Which is the same penalty that Jeff Hardy got hit with. Karen says that Marty grew jealous of the success that Shawn was having, and he would have pictures of Shawn Michaels on the wall at home that he would throw darts at. And he just continued to spiral until he hit rock bottom. And he had decided that he was going to do cocaine until his heart just exploded. Unless God gave him some kind of a sign. And in the episode, he joked, he says, it had to be an obvious one because I'm not the brightest guy. And that's when, out of the blue, he gets a phone call from Shawn Michaels, who he had not spoken to in years. Shawn had become born again. He had gotten his own life together because he was going down a very bad path with drugs. And he invites Marty to a ministry out in Arizona to be baptized by Shawn. And I actually have those photos saved in an old file folder. I used to randomly save shit that I would see online. And I've got these 2 photos of Shawn and Marty. They're in a pool with a bunch of other people, and Shawn is baptizing him. We get to 2005 after this. WWE is building to Shawn Michaels against Kurt Angle at WrestleMania 21. Since Jannetty taught Shawn everything that he knows, Kurt was going to teach Shawn how to tap out by making Jannetty do it. So first, we got a Rockers reunion on Raw against La Resistance, which was I remember at the time, I thought that was very cool. Just hearing the music again and seeing them, and it was like no time at all had passed. The only thing is Shawn actually botched the kip up. They went to go do the double kip up early in the match, and Shawn kind of botched it. But I remember thinking, okay, this is really cool. And then on SmackDown, Marty had a singles match with Kurt Angle, and they had a really good match. Jannetty was so impressive that Vince, in another moment of weakness, decided to ignore the man's history, and he rehired him again. Marty claimed they offered him $1 million contract, and then a week later he was in jail. I will bet you $1 million that I don't have that he did not get $1 million contract. He said he got into a fight with the wife, who happened to be a stripper, and the neighbors called the cops. And he was already on probation, so he was arrested, and that was it for his contract with WWE. His friends noted that Marty has a habit of hanging out with strippers who are doing drugs. And his friend Mike piped up and he said, I like that too, but don't be shocked when it bites you in the ass. Well, I mean, that's something else that Marty apparently likes. To each their own. But you talk about crashing and burning in spectacular fashion. We did get one great thing out of that short Jannetty run, though, which was the Sexy Kurt song on SmackDown. That never would have happened, right? Marty Jannetty still can't walk. I remember those lyrics. But wait, there's more. Vince McMahon decided to bring him back again. Again. This guy has had more chances than he has brain cells in his head. The following year, 2006, as part of the angle building to Shawn against Vince McMahon at WrestleMania 22. I want to read you something here. This is from the March 13th, 2006 issue of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. Wherever the Marty Jannetty angle was going, and most figured it would wind up with him turning on Shawn Michaels, is out the window. I see what Dave did there. Jannetty's personal problems of the past resurfaced after TV this past week, and he was let go on March 3rd. Apparently, the creative team came up with a storyline involving Jannetty as part of the Vince-Shawn buildup. When John Laurinaitis was told about it, he contacted Jannetty and found out because of his legal problem from last year that put him in jail and cost him his previous chance with the company, that he is now under house arrest until June of 2007. In a very controversial decision, they decided to work through the system and offer him the job anyway, getting him a day pass to work 1 day a week. There was some sort of problem involving a urine test upon coming back from either his first or second appearance. The question is, would the court revoke his passes permanently and cost him his job when he had no possible opportunity for a job anywhere near this level, and perhaps ever again at his age? Whatever the exact problem was, WWE found out they would not be able to use him for the March 6 tapings in Birmingham, nor at this point for any future dates. TV for March 6 had already been written, and he was on the show and scheduled for a regular role going forward, and when they realized he couldn't go, the decision was made. Jannetty, on a MySpace post, claimed that WWE was working on taking care of his legal problems, and if they could, he would be brought back, which is a 180 from what we were told. The question is then, why would WWE publicly announce he was fired if they were working on bringing him back? From a fan standpoint, nobody even knew he was hired in the first place. He had just done 2 TVs, and the story was that he had to kiss Vince's ass to get a job. For those who don't remember that was the Vince McMahon Kiss My Ass segment, where he was supposed to Marty was supposed to act all upset at him having to kiss Vince's ass, and instead I think he laughed during the segment. But Meltzer says he didn't kiss it. So on TV, the story, quote-unquote, worked out fine for him never appearing. Jannetty went on an internet diatribe about me, making up a story without giving one example of anything being incorrect that I wrote. He claimed his parole officer wouldn't let him go to Birmingham, and that's why WWE let him go. But that was leaving out why, and also technically incorrect because he was not released from jail and out on parole. He was under house arrest. Our first report was he was fired. WWE reported it before we did. That it was not a storyline report, but a real firing, which is true. That it was a discipline situation, which is true. That he had been scripted into the March 6 show, which is true. That the writers had to rewrite the segment, which is true. That they were told he was never being brought back and were told to rewrite the segment in a manner so as not to build for a return, which is also true. We're told that Vince McMahon was shooting when he used the line on Raw that Marty Jannetty would never be seen on WWE television again. Even I had forgotten all of the details. Like, I knew he was in for the Kiss My Ass thing in 2006 and got fired again, but I couldn't remember the details. So when I did my research and I went looking for the details, it all came flooding back to me. It's just a comedy of errors with this guy. With him now being largely housebound with the bad ankle, Beefcake's wife said that Facebook has become Marty's audience. They could devote an entire episode to all of the insane things that this man has said on his Facebook page alone. One of the craziest being when he asked his followers for advice on whether he should have sex with a girl that he thought was his daughter, but the DNA test said that she wasn't. Now, he later claimed that he lost his phone and somebody hacked into it and wrote that. He said the same thing in the episode. Oh, I was hacked. I never even saw the post. I was hacked, he said. This from the same man who once said in a kayfabe commentary shoot that his first sexual encounter was with a family member when he was 12 years old. I think he said maybe it was his niece. So we shouldn't be surprised by any of this. But even that is not as crazy as his claim that when he was 13 years old, he murdered a man that he says tried to molest him in the parking lot of the bowling alley that he worked at. Police took the claim seriously enough that they launched an investigation. This was the original. I want to read the original Facebook post to you that launched the whole investigation, and he deleted it shortly after he posted it, but the internet never lies. He said, "I never told no one this, even my brother Gino, because Gino would have killed him, and I didn't want my brother gone. Hell, he'd only recently come home from Vietnam. I was 13, working at Victory Lane's bowling alley, buying weed from a gay man that worked there. I substituted gay man for the word that he actually used, which I won't repeat. And he put his hands on me. He dragged me around to the back of the building. You already know what he was going to try to do. That was the very first time I made a man disappear. They never found him. They should look in the Chattahoochee River. But Winnie, the girl in these pics, I likes you so damn much, probably my favorite, but I promised myself way back then nobody would ever hurt me again. That includes you. I loved you, but you hurt me with your effing Jamaican jealousy. You can go your own way. I don't need you." And he included photos of a woman who was either his girlfriend or his flavor of the month back then, take your pick. In the post, he says he never told anybody that story before, but in the episode, both Karen and Al Snow claimed that they knew that story going back to the 90s, that Marty told them about it. And Karen says that's one instance where she actually believes he's telling the truth. Now, the day after he posted that, it became national news, and he went on the Boston Wrestling YouTube channel to try to clarify things. He said he worked at the bowling alley, and the front desk clerk tried to molest him. He said he knew the man sold weed, but he didn't know the person lured children. He claimed the man fondled him inside his car, and then when he tried to get out, the man got angry. He says he was pulled out of the car and had his pants pulled down. He grabbed a nearby brick, and he struck the man in the head. He said the guy didn't deserve to die, but he did deserve to get his ass beaten. And he said the trauma of nearly being raped and then killing someone and then throwing their body into the river and then finding out on the news that the man was missing, it affected him badly. Based on Jannetty's age, this would have happened in 1973. When I first talked about this story on the podcast, I checked, and there were no unsolved murders in the state listed online before 1980. In the episode, Marty now claims it was a story that he made up to get people to leave him alone. And the producers asked him to tell the story hypothetically. Like O.J. Simpson, if I did it. So they traveled with Marty to the site of the old bowling alley so that he could point out the exact area where this supposedly went down. Only now he claims he told a family member after he hit the guy in the head because he panicked and he didn't know what to do. And instead of calling the police, they dumped the body in the river nearby. But of course, this is all hypothetical. And he says it was a storyline he came up with to get him back into wrestling. What company would even entertain such a storyline? He claims what happened to him in the car is true, but the rest of it was all made up. The Columbus Police Department issued the following statement to Dark Side of the Ring. They say, "We have no evidence of a murder, connected cold cases, or missing persons concerning Mr. Jannetty's allegations." The problem with a bullshit artist is that it's hard to believe a word they say even when they're telling the truth. If Marty was molested as a child, obviously that's horrible. Maybe he makes up stories to cope with the trauma. I don't know. Scott Hall actually did kill someone when he was younger, outside of a bar, and it severely fucked him up for the rest of his life. He never sought counseling. He just kept it all bottled up. That's something that'll definitely mess with your head. Do I believe his story about killing the guy? I don't. And I think whoever it was that he claims hacked into his phone all those years ago should hack back into it and change his password so he can't get on Facebook anymore. It's a sad state of affairs when it comes to Marty Jannetty. Bushwhacker Luke once tried to get him to link up with DDP so that Dallas could help him, but Marty bailed. You have to want to help yourself, but he just seems incapable of doing that. You know, that gig that WWE signed him to in 2005, that could have been a turning point for him. I know they wanted him to have a coaching role as well. I think a sober Marty Jannetty of sound body and mind could have been a huge asset to the next generation of talent. Imagine if he had walked the straight and narrow right now. It might be Shawn Michaels running NXT with Marty Jannetty as one of his head coaches. You know, maybe Jannetty would be in the role that Matt Bloom is in. I mean, who knows? The Rockers could be running NXT. That was door number 1. He chose door number 2. And instead of walking through it, he walked right into it and knocked himself silly. Al Snow says that he's afraid Marty is going to end up alone. Brutus says he loves Marty, but he wants him to keep his hands off his wife. And his wife said that she would flash Marty right now, but she's all mic'd up. Thank God. And Al brought up the running joke about somebody being the Jannetty of the team. And how anybody who is called the Jannetty should be lucky to be the Jannetty. Because Marty was a great talent. And he really was. But Al has to know the Jannetty of the team phrase, it has nothing to do with the man's in-ring ability. It has everything to do with his torpedoing his own career while his partner went on to superstardom. That's what people mean when they say, who's going to be the Jannetty of the team? Right? Who became a bigger star? Who do you think is going to be the bigger star of the two? He liked to drink. He liked to party. Right? Party Marty. And that, coupled with a lot of bad decisions he made, led to what I would say was a career only half fulfilled. But at the end of the day in life, you make your own bed and you have to lay in it. And that's the story of Marty Jannetty. And that wraps up Season 4 of Dark Side of the Ring. I hope you've enjoyed these reviews. There has been no confirmation of a Season 5, but I know the producers want to do one, and they filmed material for a number of episodes that did not air. Specifically, I know they wanted to do episodes on Scott Hall and Mike Awesome, but it leaked out months ago, and one of the producers did say, when that happens, when things leak, people sometimes get cold feet about participating. So I don't know if those are going to happen. They may have filmed stuff already for the Awesome one, and also one on Chris Adams. But there's plenty of other subjects. Brian Christopher, Perry Saturn, Ashley Massaro is a sad one. Daphne is also a very sad one. Buck Zumov, look him up if you want to know more about that sicko. Russo and TNA would be a little more lighthearted, but they could definitely get an episode out of that. Right down to the fiasco that ensued at the end of his run when they secretly brought him back. But anyway, drop a comment. Let me know what other topics you might want to see on a Season 5 of Dark Side of the Ring.